generic Muathe with Muathe.com. Let's take a look at the same stock, same chart, but this time on the weekly. Remember, this is the same chart. This is the monthly view. Now I'm taking a look at the same stock from a weekly view to see what we can learn from it. Let's begin with the primary trend lines here. We can see a primary trend line breakout in 2009 for a nice entry here. We can also see that if you take the weekly closing high here and this weekly closing high, you get a trend line that should be something like this on a weekly closing basis. Actually comes and makes contact with this weekly closing high and maybe one right there, but eventually there's a breakout which was shaky, breaks out, comes back to test the line, and ultimately works its way higher. So that's a primary trend line. Let's take a look at this trend line here in 2012, RSI trend line break for this entry here. That's good. Now, before I go too far, we'll see that the corresponding RSI action also is relevant on the MACDs. As you can see, MACDs breaking out on a primary trend line. Why is it primary? In case you missed the previous video, is because this is an all-time weekly closing high at the time, and so is this RSI, and this MACDs are corresponding to an all-time high in the price. That's why it's primary. Also, this is a breakout here that we just discussed, and that also corresponds very nicely with this. Well, there was a trend line here. Remember, we could in theory, and in fact we can, because this is hindsight analysis, and like I keep saying, this is oversimplification. Please understand that before you crucify me. I'm just trying to show you that if you can marry these ideas with other time frame confirmations, then you get a set of factors as to why you can take a trade one way or the other. I'm not saying that this is just, draw a line and bam, you're making money and running to the bank. No. What I'm saying here is you can add this to your analysis, or at least consideration, and then you multiply your analysis by taking a look at different time frames. Make sure you consider the market environment, because the market environment is very big. Market environment influences about 75% of a stock's direction, so you have to account for that too. And 15% of a stock's direction is based on sector performance, so you have to account for all these things. All I'm doing here is taking a huge complex subject and try and break it down. All right, let's go back to, so yes, in theory you can take a look at the breakout here. That's a trend line break, but it's not a primary trend line break. Why? Well, because this is not an all-time weekly closing high. So the primary trend lines that we're talking about here, and again you can take a look at the description, are based on all-time closing highs. Let's take a look here. We continue on, and in the spirit of keeping it simple, let me just consider the RSI and the price breakout. So after we get this breakout, and again we are using weekly closing highs, not intraday highs, weekly closing highs, because it's a weekly chart, and we get this eventual breakout. And we can see other breakouts here. This is an all-time weekly closing high, so any trend line breakout there should be important. And yes, that led to a move higher. There is another trend line break here. Again, primary trend line breakout is what we are discussing, and it's primary because it was based on a trend line that connects to a major all-time high at the time. There is a trend line based on these closing highs here, should be somewhere around connecting the high. So this was a trend line, well, maybe lower. This was a trend line. Once you break out, that was good for a movement to the upside. And we can also see, like, for example, this trend line here corresponds with this RSI trend line breakout, short-term trend line breakout, that again corresponds with an all-time high at the time. So all this did have RSI corresponding, giving us confirmation of a trend break here. And again, there's another trend line here. This movement in the RSI corresponds with this entry based on all-time high here. So yes, you can see that if you use a primary trend line, and especially once you combine other factors, it gives you an idea of what might be taking place. Now, because this is the all-time closing highs here, closing lows, excuse me, we can draw a trend line and see whether we can get any recent possibility of a trend line break. We connect to the weekly closing lows here and close there, and we can see the market has never broken a primary trend line as far as this stock is concerned as of right now. The one thing we do see though is based on this RSI low, which corresponds to intraday lows here, intraday lows, all-time intraday lows, RSI corresponding here, we can draw a trend line that should look something like that. And this at some point was a major primary trend line break. Why is it primary and why is it an important trend line? Well, again, because it corresponds to all-time intraday lows. So once you break this trend line, that's a serious sell signal, which might explain why the stock has come off the highs here as of middle 2015. Eric Muathe with Muathe.com. I shall continue on with a couple more videos in this series, so check them out as we go along. As always, good luck, peace, and blessings. ESCS. Mwah. Woo.